They call it logistics. I call it babysitting 800 trucks full of steel, rubber, and diesel rolling across Texas at 75 miles per hour. My name is Wesley Morrison, but everyone calls me Tank. I'm 48 years old, and for the last 24 years I've been the invisible backbone holding Pinnacle Freight Solutions together. You don't know me, but if you bought gas in Houston, groceries after a hurricane, or military supplies for our boys overseas, I'm the reason it got there on time. I'm the contract operations manager, which is corporate speak for the guy who knows where all the bodies are buried and has the shovel to prove it. I don't have a corner office overlooking downtown Dallas. I have a desk in the operations center that smells like coffee and diesel exhaust right in the heart of the machine. And I liked it that way. The noise let me hear when something was going wrong. I knew when a refinery shut down in Beaumont would mess up deliveries in Oklahoma 3 days before the plant manager even made the call. My Navy training taught me that logistics isn't about moving stuff, it's about keeping people alive. 6 years running supply lines for carrier battle groups teaches you that when the system breaks, people die. Whether it's ammunition for Marines in a firefight or insulin for diabetics after a hurricane, failure isn't an option. That mindset stuck with me when I transitioned to civilian life 24 years ago. But let me get one thing straight before I tell you how I brought down a $2.5 billion empire with a single email. I didn't want to be the bad guy. I just wanted to do my job and take care of my people. The trouble started when old Harold Caldwell decided to retire to his Montana ranch. Harold was tough as boot leather, but he knew the price of diesel and respected the men who moved it. We had an understanding. I kept his trucks rolling, he kept the paychecks coming. Harold understood that in logistics, relationships matter more than spreadsheets. You can have the best software in the world, but if the union boss doesn't trust you, your trucks don't roll. Then came Stanley. Stanley Caldwell, 29 years old, MBA from Northwestern that Daddy bought with a new library wing. Kid had teeth so white they looked radioactive and walked into the CEO office wearing a suit that cost more than my truck payment. He couldn't tell a bill of lading from a grocery list, but suddenly he was running the show. Stanley had read every business book written in the last 5 years. He talked about disrupting traditional paradigms and leveraging synergistic solutions. What he didn't understand was that logistics is older than civilization. The Romans moved armies across Europe using the same basic principles we use today. Know your roots, trust your people, and always have a backup plan. First week, Stanley installed a kombucha tap in the break room. Second week, he fired the maintenance crew to outsource for efficiency, which meant our equipment started breaking down within days. Third week, he brought in consultants who had never driven a truck but somehow knew exactly how to optimize our operations. By month 3, he was walking around with this woman Barbara who called herself our Director of Strategic Synergies or some nonsense title to justify putting his girlfriend on payroll. Barbara had the kind of MBA that teaches you to solve problems you don't understand with solutions that don't work. I kept my head down. I'm a professional. Spent 6 years in Navy logistics, survived 3 recessions, a pandemic, and a cyber attack that had me routing trucks with paper maps and a landline phone. I figured I could survive Stanley. After all, I'd dealt with 22-year-old ensigns who thought they knew better than seasoned chiefs. This couldn't be worse. The friction wasn't immediate. It was a slow burn, like sand in a gearbox. Stanley didn't like me. I was old school. I was analog. I was a middle-aged widower who preferred to pick up the phone and handle business directly instead of using Slack or whatever app of the month he was pushing. To him, I was a relic from the dark ages before artificial intelligence and cloud computing. To me, he was a hood ornament on a Peterbilt, shiny, expensive, and the first thing to break when you hit a pothole. The thing is, logistics isn't about technology, it's about trust. When a driver's stuck in a blizzard in Oklahoma with a load of medical supplies, he doesn't call customer service, he calls Tank. When the Border Patrol holds up a convoy because someone forgot to file the right paperwork, they don't want to talk to someone reading from a script. They want someone who knows their name and has been straight with them for 20 years. I built those relationships one handshake at a time. Every Christmas, I sent cards to 400 contacts across the Southwest. Not company cards, personal ones with handwritten notes asking about their kids, their health, their problems. When Vincent from the Stevedores Union lost his brother in Iraq, I drove 200 miles to the funeral. When Eugene at Houston Emergency Storage needed help getting his son into a good trade school, I made some calls. That's the network Stanley inherited. Not servers and software, but flesh and blood relationships built on respect and reliability. And he treated it like it was just another business process to be optimized. The day everything changed was a Tuesday in September. Hurricane season was ramping up, and I was deep in emergency prep protocols, coordinating with the Gulf Coast Stevedores Union. These guys don't mess around. They move critical supplies when the storms hit, and if they don't trust you, people die. I'd worked with them through Hurricane Harvey, Rita, and Ike. They knew I'd never let them down. I was on the phone with Vincent, their rep, for 4 hours straight, working out fuel reserve positioning for disaster response. We were coordinating emergency supply routes that would activate the moment a hurricane made landfall. Medical supplies for hospitals, fuel for emergency services, generators for shelters, the kind of logistics work that doesn't show up on quarterly reports but keeps communities alive. Stanley breezed by my desk with Barbara trailing behind him like a lost puppy in designer heels. The timing couldn't have been worse. I was coordinating emergency fuel positioning that could mean the difference between life and death when the next storm hit. "Tank," he said, not stopping, just tossing the words over his shoulder like a gum wrapper. "We need to talk about your workspace. It's cluttered. Bad optics for investors." My desk was covered with shipping manifests, DOT compliance forms, and legal pads with my handwriting tracking emergency routes. Military transport authorizations were spread across one corner, classified logistics requiring my personal security clearance. It was the nerve center of the company's disaster response system, and it looked like organized chaos to anyone who didn't understand the business. "I'm in the middle of hurricane prep, Stanley," I said, covering the phone receiver. "If I stop now, we lose our emergency contracts." He stopped and turned around, giving me that condescending smile rich kids give to working folks. "We have software for that now, Tank. Move it to the cloud. Store everything digitally. It's 2024, not 1984. Barbara nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. We're implementing a fully integrated digital ecosystem. Paper is so analog." I looked at them both. Stanley in his $3,000 suit that probably cost more than most drivers make in a month. Barbara with her color-coordinated clipboard and smartphone that never stopped buzzing with social media notifications. Neither one had ever loaded a truck, dealt with customs, or talked a driver through a breakdown on I-35 in the middle of the night. "Vincent, hold on 1 second, I said into the phone. "Stanley, you see these papers?" I gestured to my desk. "This is the authorization for military medical supplies moving to Fort Hood tomorrow. This manifest requires a wet signature from someone with DOT security clearance. That's me. The computer can't sign it. The cloud can't authorize it. When 500 wounded soldiers need medical supplies, they don't care about your digital ecosystem." Stanley's smile faltered for just a second. "Well, obviously there are exceptions for military contracts, but the principle remains. We need to modernize our processes. And this," I picked up another stack, "is the emergency fuel authorization for the Gulf Coast. When Hurricane Xavier hits next month, these routes activate automatically. The governors of Louisiana and Texas have my direct number. Not the company switchboard, my number. Because when people are dying, they don't want to talk to a chatbot." Barbara was furiously scribbling notes on her clipboard. "We should definitely optimize these legacy communication channels through our new omni-channel platform." I stared at her. "Legacy communication channels? You mean phone calls?" "Exactly. So inefficient. Everything should flow through our centralized digital hub." Vincent's voice crackled through the receiver. "Tank, you still there? We got deadlines, brother." "I'm here, Vincent." "Sorry about that. Management consultation." Vincent knew what that meant. He'd been dealing with corporate types for 30 years. Stanley walked away, Barbara clicking behind him. I heard her say, "We really need to workshop some solutions for his resistance to change." "Everything all right, Tank?" Vincent asked in his gravelly voice that sounded like 40 years of cigarettes and hard work. "Just a minor glitch in the matrix, Vincent," I said, unconsciously reaching for the pack of cigarettes I'd quit 8 years ago when Sarah died. Stress made me miss them. Now, about those fuel depot authorizations. For the next hour, I coordinated the largest emergency preparedness operation in company history. $35 million in critical supplies positioned across the hurricane corridor, medical equipment for field hospitals, generators for nursing homes, water purification systems for refugee centers, fuel for first responders. I saved the deal. I secured the emergency response network that would kick in when the next hurricane hit. The company made $35 million off those contracts in the next quarter alone, with renewal options worth another $50 million over 3 years. Did I get a thank you? No. I got an email from HR about the clean desk policy. The thing about logistics is that success is invisible. When everything works perfectly, nobody notices. The grocery stores stay stocked, the hospitals get their supplies, the gas stations don't run dry. It's only when the system breaks that people realize how complicated it really is. But the breaking point wasn't about work. It never is. It's always the personal disrespect that lights the fuse. The moment when they make it clear that they don't just disagree with your methods, they don't respect you as a person. It was mid-September, peak hurricane season prep. I was working 14-hour days, living on ibuprofen and black coffee, coordinating emergency supply chains that could mean the difference between life and death when the storms hit. My daughter Jessica had called from college asking if I was okay because I sounded exhausted. I told her I was fine, just busy saving Texas from the next disaster. Then the email landed in my inbox at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday. I remember the exact time because I was finishing a call with Customs and Border Protection about expedited clearances for emergency medical supplies. Subject: mandatory attendance, celebrating visionary leadership. The invitation was printed on heavy cardstock with gold foil embossing. It probably cost more per sheet than most folks make in an hour. Join us this Saturday at the Highland Park Country Club for an evening of innovation and celebration as we honor our CEO, Stanley Caldwell, on his 30th year of excellence. Attendance is mandatory for all senior staff. Black tie, preferred. Wives and significant others welcome. I read it 3 times. Saturday, the busiest Saturday of the month. The day I had to personally oversee the positioning of emergency fuel supplies across the Gulf Coast, military contracts that required my direct oversight due to DOT security protocols, temperature-controlled medical supplies that would spoil without proper routing authorization. Moreover, 30th year of excellence? The kid was 29 years old. He'd been with the company for exactly 6 months. His only excellence was being born to the right father. I looked at the invitation again. Highland Park Country Club, where annual membership cost more than most drivers made in a year, where they probably had a dress code that excluded anyone who'd actually worked for a living. I hit reply on the invitation. My fingers moved across the keyboard with military precision, each word chosen carefully. Stanley, congratulations on the milestone birthday. Unfortunately, I cannot attend Saturday's celebration. I have critical emergency supply positioning scheduled that requires my direct oversight due to DOT security protocols. Military contracts demand personal authorization for temperature-controlled medical supplies. Have a great celebration. Regards, Tank. Professional, reasonable, necessary. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. That weekend, while Stanley was sipping champagne at his country club party, I was in Houston coordinating the largest emergency supply operation in company history. Hurricane Xavier was still 10 days out, but preparation meant the difference between saving lives and counting bodies. I spent Saturday in the Port of Houston watching containers of medical supplies get loaded onto trucks bound for evacuation centers across the coast. Each container required my personal signature on federal transport documents. Each truck needed routing authorization that only my security clearance could provide. At 3 a.m. Sunday morning, my phone rang. It was Eugene Martinez, our Houston operations manager, a 25-year veteran who'd started driving trucks before GPS existed. Tank, we got a problem. The refrigerated containers from Dallas are running late. If we don't get them positioned by Monday morning, the insulin spoils. I was already pulling on my boots. I'm 20 minutes out. Have the paperwork ready. For the next 4 hours, I coordinated the emergency rerouting of diabetic supplies that would keep 10,000 people alive after the hurricane hit. No software could make those decisions. No app could sign the federal authorizations. It was 30 years of relationships, experience, and trust. Monday morning, the operations center felt different. You know that feeling right before a tornado hits? When the air gets heavy and the hair on your arm stands up? The phones were too quiet. People were looking at me sideways, then looking away. I sat down at my desk and tried to log into the system. Access denied. That's weird, I thought. Typed my credentials again. Access denied. Carol from payroll walked by, avoiding eye contact. Linda from dispatch suddenly found her computer screen fascinating. Even the drivers loading at the dock seemed subdued. I was reaching for my phone to call IT when I heard expensive shoes clicking across the concrete floor. Stanley's voice boomed across the operations center, artificially loud like he was performing for an audience. "Tank!" I turned around slowly. There he was, flanked by Barbara holding a clipboard, and two security guards who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The entire operations floor had gone silent. 47 employees pretending to work while watching the show. "Server problems?" I asked, though my gut was already telling me the answer. "We're restructuring the leadership team," Stanley said, smoothing his red silk tie. "A power tie for a man with no power. Your consistent resistance to organizational evolution and refusal to integrate with our collaborative culture was the final indicator that you're not aligned with our forward-thinking vision." I stared at him. The silence stretched out like a rubber band about to snap. Every ear in the building was tuned to this conversation. "You're firing me," I said flatly, "because I was working Saturday instead of watching you blow out candles." "It's about cultural synthesis," Barbara chimed in with her nasal voice, reading from her clipboard. "We need team members who resonate with our innovative energy frequency and embrace transformational paradigm shifts." I looked at Barbara. I looked at Stanley. I looked at the security guards. Then I looked past them at the operations floor where men and women who'd worked beside me for decades were watching their world crumble. "Stanley," I said, my voice dangerously calm, military calm, the kind of calm that comes right before you make a decision that changes everything. "I manage contracts with 400 vendors across 5 states. I'm the authorized signatory for military transport protocols, the Gulf Coast Stevedores Union, and the Border Customs Alliance. I hold the security clearance for $200 million in federal contracts. Those relationships don't just transfer to your collaborative culture." Stanley laughed, an ugly sound that echoed off the warehouse walls. "Everyone is replaceable, Tank. That's basic business economics. Institutional knowledge can be systematized and optimized through proper knowledge management protocols." He gestured toward Barbara. "Barbara has already initiated a comprehensive audit of your processes. We'll have everything digitized and streamlined within the month." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Hand over your security badge and clearance cards," he continued. "Security will escort you out." I looked at my desk one last time. The shipping manifests I'd been working on when the hurricane hit. The emergency contact lists with phone numbers for people who trusted me with their lives. The photo of my daughter Jessica at her college graduation. Proud of her old man who kept America moving. I stood up slowly. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't flip the table like some movie hero having a breakdown. I reached into my wallet, pulled out my plastic ID badge and federal security card, and dropped them into Stanley's outstretched palm. "Okay," I said. Stanley looked disappointed. He wanted drama. He wanted me to beg for my job, to grovel, to make a scene that would justify his decision to the employees watching. He wanted to feel like the conquering hero crushing the old guard rebellion. "Tell your dad I said good luck," I added quietly. "My dad's in Montana," Stanley sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He doesn't concern himself with operational details anymore." "He will," I said. I grabbed my coffee mug, a Navy Logistics Corps mug Jessica had bought me for Father's Day, and the picture of my daughter. I walked toward the exit, past the loading docks where I'd started 24 years ago, past the dispatch office where I'd spent countless nights coordinating emergency runs, past the break room where I'd shared coffee and stories with drivers who'd become family. As the elevator doors closed, cutting off the sight of Stanley's smug face and the shell-shocked expressions of my former colleagues, I checked my watch. 9:30 a.m. By 10 o'clock a.m., the first emergency supply convoy would be hitting the staging area in Houston. By 10:15 a.m., the entire Pinnacle freight network would start realizing that the kill switch had just been pulled. The air outside smelled like diesel and rain clouds building on the horizon. But for the first time in 24 years, I wasn't worried about the weather forecast. I felt free, dangerous, but free. I walked to my F-150 and sat there for a minute, listening to the distant rumble of trucks on the interstate. Most people, when they get fired after 2 decades, panic about mortgages and insurance. But I wasn't most people. I was a Navy logistics specialist who'd spent 24 years building relationships that ran deeper than any software system. I pulled out my personal cell phone. Thank God I'd always kept my private contacts separate from company property. I opened my email, not the company account that was already shut down, but my personal Gmail that every major vendor, every union boss, and every military logistics coordinator had on file. Call this number if the building burns down, I used to tell them. Time to watch it burn. I didn't send a mass email blast. That's amateur hour. That looks like sabotage, and I needed this to be clean. Professional. Maliciously, beautifully professional. I typed a draft message that would change everything. Subject: Notice of personnel change. Security clearance. Update: To whom it may concern. Effective immediately. I, Wesley Morrison, am no longer employed by Pinnacle Freight Solutions. As such, I am no longer the authorized signatory or security clearance holder for military transport contracts, emergency response protocols, or vendor compliance agreements. Per Clause 7B of our Standard Master Service Agreements, Key Personnel Continuity, please be advised that my departure triggers automatic review of all active contracts pending appointment of a qualified successor with appropriate federal security clearances. Please direct future inquiries to Stanley Caldwell, CEO. Best regards, Tank. Clause 7B. The magic bullet I'd inserted into every major contract years ago when Pinnacle's credit rating was shaky and vendors needed assurance that someone competent was watching their investments. They trusted me personally, not the company letterhead. Stanley didn't know about Clause 7B. Stanley probably thought a master service agreement was some kind of team-building exercise. I hit send to the first contact, then the second, then the third. Allied Transport Consortium, sent. Border Customs Authority, sent. Military Logistics Command, sent. Gulf Coast Emergency Response, sent. My phone buzzed immediately. Vincent from the Stevedores Union. Tank, what the hell is this email about? I just got a bounce back from your work address saying user unknown. I'm out, Vincent, I said, leaning back in my truck seat. Stanley cut me loose this morning. Apparently, I don't resonate with their energy frequency. Vincent laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. Energy frequency? Does he know we got $8 million in temperature-controlled medical supplies rolling tonight for the hurricane prep? That insulin expires if it sits too long without proper authorization. He thinks Barbara can handle it with their digital ecosystem. Barbara? The clipboard lady? Tank. She don't know a hazmat endorsement from a beauty pageant. If you ain't clearing those loads, my guys park the trucks. Clause 7B kicks in, right? Clause 7B, I confirmed. Every truck stops until we get proper authorization. Enjoy your day off, brother. 1 domino down. 399 to go. I started the truck and drove to Murphy's Diner, a greasy spoon near the freight yards. It was the kind of place where the coffee could strip paint and the waitresses had seen everything twice. Perfect command post for what came next. Diane, the waitress who'd served me coffee during 1,000 late-night emergencies, knew something was different. You look like a man who just quit his job or got fired, she said, pouring coffee without being asked. Little of both, Diane. Can I get the Wi-Fi password? For the next 3 hours, I conducted the most professional corporate demolition in logistics history. My phone buzzed constantly. Swift Emergency Transport, Houston Customs, Border Patrol Logistics, Military Transport Command. Every vendor who'd trusted Tank Morrison for the last 24 years suddenly needed to know where their business was going. By noon, Stanley was learning what happens when you fire the foundation of a building. The digital tracking system I monitored from my laptop showed red dots spreading across Texas like a virus. Red meant trucks stopped for more than 30 minutes. There was a cluster outside Houston, fuel depot access codes that hadn't been updated. Another cluster at the Mexico border. Customs brokers who wouldn't release loads without my personal authorization. At 1 p.m., my phone rang. Stanley himself, voice tight with panic. Tank, you have to give us the security codes. Drivers are abandoning loads. Stanley, I said calmly, I don't have security access anymore. You revoked my clearance, remember? Sharing federal security codes with unauthorized personnel would be a crime. I could go to prison. But you're destroying the company. I'm following federal security protocols. You said everyone was replaceable. Surely your streamlined processes can handle a simple password reset. We called the federal IT contractor. They said only the original clearance holder can authorize emergency transfers. Sounds like a design flaw in your knowledge management system. At 3 p.m., the news broke. Pinnacle Freight Systems reports, massive system failure. Gulf Coast hurricane preparations disrupted. I was trending in industry publications as the ghost who broke the machine. Then my phone rang with the call I'd been expecting. Kenneth Thorne, CEO of Lone Star Logistics. Tank Morrison. I've been trying to hire you for 15 years. I'm suddenly available, I said. My offer still stands. Senior VP Southwest Operations. Your own division. Complete autonomy. One condition. Pinnacle's pension fund is worth $45 million. When this crashes, those drivers lose everything. We absorb the pension liability. That's expensive loyalty. That's not loyalty, Kenneth. That's buying the best drivers in Texas. 2 weeks later, Kenneth and I bought Pinnacle's assets for $1 from Harold Caldwell, who'd flown back from Montana to survey the wreckage his son had created. Stanley faced federal charges for safety violations after an unqualified driver he'd hired crashed a hazmat load. Barbara started a consulting firm teaching authentic leadership through crisis. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my corner office at Lone Star Logistics, watching hurricane supply convoys roll out of the port of Houston. Same drivers, same routes, same relationships, but now they're protected by a company that understands what really moves freight. My phone rings. It's Jessica calling from college. Dad, I saw the business news article about you. The man who broke big logistics. I'm proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. I smile, watching our trucks disappear into the Texas sunset, carrying supplies that'll keep people alive when the next storm hits. Thanks, sweetheart. Your old man just learned that sometimes you have to tear down the machine to build it back right. The machine's humming again. And this time, the right person's holding the wrench.